I'm Traci Austin, your host of the People Strategy Podcast. This show provides interviews with organizational leaders and ongoing coaching experiences that highlight elevating people in organizations through a people strategy roadmap.
Hi, I'm Chad Franzen from Rise 25. Today, I am the host of the People Strategy Podcast, where we dive into the latest trends and best practices in talent management and organizational development. This episode is brought to you by Elevated Talent Consulting, a leading provider of comprehensive talent management solutions. Elevated Talent Consulting was founded on a belief that every individual has a right and a choice to be fulfilled in their work. As leaders, we have an obligation to create the space for ourselves and team members to thrive. Creating that space often fails, even with the best of intentions, resulting in employee disengagement and missing business outcomes. As you'll hear from Traci, coming up, she uses her coaching, consulting, and training experience to serve organizations through the Team Retention Program. Discover how they can transform your workforce at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. Traci Austin is a certified coach and HR professional with over 2 decades of experience in bridging the gap between the C-suite and HR leaders in aligning the business strategy to the business results. She is focused on partnering with leaders at all levels to create fulfilling work. This is done by focusing on 4 levers of engagement: fit to role, leadership, team, and cultural alignment to the strategies and core values to meet the business outcomes. She is the chief strategy consultant and owner of Elevated Talent Consulting, a certified women-owned business that partners with leaders in the mid-level manager roles and HR professionals to bridge the gap with both their team and the executive team in exceeding performance expectations while being fulfilled in their work. Traci, it's great to be here with you today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for the great introduction and our conversation today. And what's so much fun about this team retention kind of series that we're doing is it pulls in so many of the amazing conversations that we've had with guests over the years. And there's 2 guests that we've talked about talent strategies and talent pathways with in the past, and some of them go way back to the very beginning. One of the shout outs I want to do is with Rebecca Gibson. And Rebecca and I actually created talent pathways together for a long-term care facility many years ago. So that's a great podcast to listen into to actually hear that story of how we implemented that. And then I also had a conversation with Chobia Tacoma with Korn Ferry about leveraging internal talent pathways and a lot of what she does in her consulting work with Korn Ferry around talent pathways. So very excited to kind of go through some of the how-tos today with you, Chad.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Very nice. I always enjoyed these things are very informative. Honestly, they make me regret some of the employers that I've worked for, though, in the past. They never thought of things like this.
But
They
do
don't
you
have
have
broad
shout
visions.
outs? Do you have any shout outs of some of the employers that have done it well?
I want to keep the bridges still somewhat standing, They're shaky now, but we'll just keep them somewhat still standing.
I was only asking for the positive ones. So
oh, gotcha. Well, that would take me a while to think of.
Good deal.
So we're going to talk today about in-role and talent pathway plans. Can you kind of give us a general definition of a talent pathway plan?
Absolutely. So a talent pathway plan is essentially a map. And I don't, know your experience with our youngest generation coming into the workforce right now. I have a kiddo that's going into his freshman year of college and one that's in high school. And he did a youth apprenticeship this summer. And he's like, "Mom, I am sweeping." And I'm like, that's what you should be doing in a construction company during a youth apprenticeship program. You should be cleaning, right? And what the talent pathway plan does is it's essentially a map to show, hey, here's the different roles you can grow into over time. And it then lays out the behaviors, the outcomes of the job that is specifically needed, and it lays out if there's any education, certification, credentialing requirements with that growth. And what we have found over time is that especially our youngest generation does not want to come to people like us, Chad, and ask us questions. how do I actually grow? And if we can provide this information to them where they can pull it off of the intranet and take a look at it and see it and kind of start planning some of that stuff on their own, what we have found is that's a really great tool for them to utilize before a conversation happens. The other experiences that we have is someone comes up, 5 months into a role and goes, well, when am I going to get promoted? And you're like, well, got a long way to go here, buddy. So that, again, the talent pathway plan is really helpful for that. And then the pairing of that of in-role growth is essentially naming, here's some things that we need to see you grow in your current role in order for you to be eligible for that promotion to that next level position.
So there's talent pathway plans. I've also heard of succession plans. What's kind of the distinction between the two?
Yeah. So a succession plan is typically set up for a top level executive that we know is going to be leaving the organization at some point in time, typically retirement. And, our organization at Elevated Talent Consulting works a lot with family businesses, and those family businesses that pass down from one generation to the next will typically have some sort of a succession plan in place for who they're moving into that role. That is typically a family member. Then, of course, we have succession plans that are non-family members and non-family businesses as well. And with those plans, the difference is there's a key position that we know that that person is slated into within a specific period of time. And so there, we've got the person, we have the position, and we know all of the things that they need to learn to get there. With talent pathway planning, it's essentially saying, here's all of the ways that you can grow in our organization, but we don't have a person necessarily picked out for a specified position. So there's that key distinction. However, many of the same, traits are in both as far as clarity around what the expectations are in each role, what it's going to take to progress to the next. Sometimes there's built-in mentoring within talent pathway plans. The good ones have it. There's definitely built-in mentoring within a succession plan.
So it sounds like kind of what based on what you've said, there's a lot of employee development that's associated with this that's needed. I've heard about employee development plans more so than pathway plans. What's the difference between the two of those?
Yeah. So the employee development plans are essentially specifically laying out, here's the skills you need to learn for this specific job. A talent pathway plan combines that with growth through the organization. So development plans may be very specific for an employee based on not meeting performance versus saying, hey, we're essentially going to create development plans for somebody brand new in a role to senior in a role, along with how to grow up and through. Because guess what? Some of us want to hit a certain level and we never, ever, ever, ever want to manage people ever, right?
Mm-hmm.
We never want to be a people manager. Others love the people management piece. And we don't want to do the really detailed specialist type roles. And so with a talent pathway plan, what we're doing is we're laying out the different roles throughout the organization. So we can have a specialist plan, which is essentially our project managers that are not people managers. Then we have our people manager pathways. So we've got our project pathways and our people pathways. And what that does is that allows folks to grow based on what their natural skill sets are. One of the biggest fails that we see is that we've promoted somebody because they're really good at a task and they're a really good doer into a people management role and they fail. And then we have to kind of cycle this back to save face for them in the organization that typically doesn't work well.
Yeah, my dad was a really talented electrical engineer, PhD, really brilliant at that. And then they promoted him to the supervisor or whatever. That was a colossal disaster.
Right. And that's a common story. And that's one of those key, that's one of the key reasons why we created the talent pathway plans. And I shouldn't say we created it alone. I mean, this idea has been out there called lots of different things. Yet really having those parallel positions of project management and people management, especially today, guess what? That project management and that institutional knowledge in something like electrical engineering, that can be more valuable than managing people.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you identify growth and pathways for career advancement within an organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I will tell you, I don't do any of this alone, right? This is all in collaboration with your management and leadership team. And a lot of those conversations will happen with those star team members that have, grown up from, they came into the organization as an intern and they grew into that VP of finance or whatever, right? We have those at, it seems like, every company. And so, with that, it's really understanding from the manager perspective, why did we move this person through the organization? What traits did they have that made them absolutely invaluable? And those are those behaviors. And then what did they do throughout? Did they go get a certification? How did they seek out that additional knowledge, et cetera? So, as HR, so often we're in a silo. And one of the most important pieces here for our HR listeners listening in is work collaboratively side by side with your leadership team and your line level staff on what does it take in this role? What does that look like? How did you grow? And what will happen is a narrative will start to develop that we can then put into, I'll say a template, so to say, to start to build this where we can see what that natural growth is, and then where we start to branch off into people management and into project management based on that person's natural strengths. And of course, we use predictive index when we're looking at a person's natural behavioral strengths, and we're mapping that against what the job needs for those natural behavioral strengths. So PI for us plays a huge role in developing these as well.
And that's kind of the process of developing talent pathways aligned with organizational goals.
Yeah, absolutely. Because guess what? As organizational goals change, departments can change, divisions can change, locations can change. So we may need to go back and change those pathways based on where we're at. If we, sell off an entire division, guess what? That pathway plan now has changed. And so what does that look like internally? And so, with those organizational goals, we're always going to tie into what is the outcome that we need for the organization and how do we build our team in order to get there, especially when we start to look at our people strategy, which is based on what our organizational goal is. Where are people at this stage in the process? And that's a lot of times where succession comes in. Hey, we know our CEO is going to retire by 2029. All right. For our organization to continue on past that, what do we need to have and what type of a leader do we need to have in place at that point in time to ensure that we can increase our business goals and outcomes?
What are some key elements to consider then when you're supporting skill development and career progression?
Yeah. So, when we're looking at skill development, and career progression, I think that there's a couple things. And I've mentioned before that manager collaboration is incredibly, incredibly important. And with skill development, I'm a little bit of a book nerd and I love a good case study. And so there's a case study out there from the Orsted Corporation. And what they have found through their study is that skill development and training is 70% experiential, meaning 70% of our learning actually happens hands-on on the job. 30% is collaborative, meaning with somebody on the team. So that could be a mentor, that could be your supervisor, that could be as a part of a project team where you're working really closely with others and you're getting that knowledge exchange. Mentoring is a piece of that. And then 10% is the classroom training. One of the keys that, was really highlighted in the Orsted study was that 10% of training and what is in those training programs, it's incredibly important that that is circled back and tied back to the manager. Essentially, hey, Chad, as a manager of this, department, what do your people need in order to be successful? You share that. We train them. As HR, we send them back to you. And then we say a couple weeks later or whatever that, timeline is, are they exhibiting the traits that you shared with us that those individuals needed, right? And so as we talk about this, of course, this is a module inside of our team retention program, which is a training program. We send out a survey to our participants and our leaders of our participants at the beginning of every program and at the end of every program. Hey, what are those key things that were really important that you want this person to learn over the next 8 weeks? We check in with the participant midterm. How we doing? And then at the end, we check in with both the participant and the manager. Were we able to hit based on the behaviors you see at work, which we're not seeing at work, right? So that we're able to hit that. So we're able then to take the feedback of the people leaders, managers of the managers in our program to really say, hey, are we doing and serving you the way that you need to? And that's something that is really important for any training program, because training is expensive, both pulling people out of doing their work, but also the training itself.
I have had positions where I kind of want to, I was thinking I'm developing these skills and I want to move on to do X things, some certain thing. And then the place I was working for was like, well, that's awesome, but we don't really need that. How do you kind of balance, maybe individual career aspirations with organizational needs?
Yeah, absolutely. And before I answer that question, this podcast hasn't aired yet, but there's a podcast with Jenna Spencer that I think is airing September 12th. So it'll be after this one. But Jenna talks about her greatest win is turnover. And I was like, huh? And she's like, the greatest one we have right now in our organization is turnover because of two things. One, they've grown more than our organization has grown, and they're looking for a bigger challenge. And whenever we can set somebody up for that, we're going to celebrate the heck out of it. The other for her with turnover is they've decided that they want to prioritize life more than work right now. Most of her employees are moms, working moms, and some of them have decided we're going to stay home for a period. So that's one of those when we look at it is, hey, have we been able to elevate the skill level so that they can move on and hit their personal professional dream, even though we can't necessarily do it here? I think that that's a really important one. But as we go back to balancing individual career aspirations with organizational needs, those are conversations that happen during the manager-employee one-on-ones, right? And I know that you've heard me ask these two questions, Chad, and I think our listeners have now heard this, but what's a work bucket list item? What's a personal bucket list item? We're looking at what are those things that they want, work and personal, and then we're also naming, hey, as an organization, like, here's our bucket list item. It may be that we want to do 10 million in revenue, or we want our profitability to increase by 3%, or we want to go into a new market, right? Those are all organizational bucket list items and organizational goals. So then it's like, all right, what do we need to do in order to hit that? And then that spills into that. So it's mirroring back and forth for both parties to find the common ground.
So when you're coming up with these talent pathway plans, what are some strategies that you use to ensure that they're effective?
Absolutely. So, and I think you heard me talk a little bit about this with, how we do our trainings and the follow-up with it is we need to ensure upfront, what is the intention of the talent pathway plan? So we're going to be very clear. What is the intention of doing this? Because if we don't get an outcome out of it, we shouldn't be doing it. There's lots of different things we can be doing and not enough time. So we need to be really clear what the intention is, and that the outcome of that intention aligns with the organizational outcomes and business goals. So we're looking at that, then we're looking at the timing within that and saying, all right, how are we going to measure it? Because guess what? If we don't come up with the measurement up front, more than likely, we're going to miss knowing how it did on the back end, right? So, I named in our training programs in this team retention program, we do a manager and a participant learner survey up front and at the end. Why? Now we have a measure, right? We didn't do that the first time. We learned that over time, and that's called continuous improvement. And you're going to be doing those same things as you create your talent pathway plans. So some key things that we've looked at is retention. So retention of our high potential staff. We know the average turnover is every 3 years. Have we been able to increase the retention of team members through promotion by more than 3 years? Great. That's one concrete way of looking at it. Another one is productivity. Has our team and our individuals been more productive based on these talent pathway plans? Because there's goals that are achievable with support within the organization. So those are two examples.
How much of a role does feedback play in talent development and pathway planning?
A ton, right? If we go back to the Orsted case study, which is essentially stating we never asked our managers for feedback on the trainings we're sending their staff to, and the same thing is here. We want to be creating really strong relationships throughout any of these programs and gathering the feedback. Because if we don't gather the feedback, one, we don't know if it's working, but we also are not improving it and doing that continuous improvement at a speed that allows us to get the highest and best results out of it. So what I will also say about feedback is to ensure that you build it into your pathway plans, right? So do you have some sort of a question in your monthly one-on-ones between each manager and team member? Is there accountability between the senior level leadership team and their management team on how many employees or what percentage of employees they are promoting through the organization over time? If you're a small organization, you're going to probably shift that a little bit to look at in-role growth, right? So when we're looking at in-role growth, it's how are folks growing within our roles? We offer a program called our New Hire Buddy program, which is an amazing in-role growth program. Why is that so hard to say? I feel like it's just all one word when it's three.
That's a tough one.
So there's too many R's in it, the in-role growth, which makes no sense. Anyway, but within that, what we've done is we've said, hey, we saw an issue of high turnover in the first 90 days. And we saw an issue with losing high potential team members to competitors because we didn't have a position to promote them into. And quite honestly, they weren't ready. So what we did is we created the New Hire Buddy program. What that program does is it's about 8 hours of training for these individuals, their first taste of leadership training, so that they get a taste of what that is and, how to ask questions and how to, show some curiosity and support to an individual. And then we're laying out, here's some questions that we're going to have you ask over those first 90 days in a role that you're familiar with because you're a rock star in it right now. And so it also created that best friend at work, so to say. So Gallup talks about how, our best engaged employees have a really close friend at work. So that's what that program does. And it doesn't promote anyone, but what it does is it allows them to grow tremendously in their current role and gain some leadership training and experience one-on-one with folks that are new to the organization.
So let's say you've got a team member employee who's kind of, starting at square one, and we've got a great talent pathway plan for this person. What are some challenges maybe that you face, common challenges that maybe you face when implementing a talent pathway plan?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. One, if this is something that HR created and did not work in collaboration with the management team on, it's going to fail. Period. Done. In this discussion, right? At least in our experience. So there really needs to be that relationship and the collaboration between the mid-level managers, leadership, and HR. It can't just be a standalone program. The other thing is that the managers must be enrolled in the program and why it is good for them. So often what I find is managers are going, I have a star employee. You mean you want me to promote them and lose them? Heck no, because that's going to impact my productivity.
Mm-hmm.
And so those conversations become really important around how are we defining a great manager, right? So this person's brand new to the role, they're new to the organization, they see this talent pathway plan and they hear people around them talking about how it's great on paper, but it's never actually worked in reality. So we want to make sure that whatever program we lay out, we're actually giving legs to in reality, and we truly have promoted people through it. We are sending folks through the talent development. We do have the enroll growth. So we want to make sure whatever promises we make on paper, we actually fulfill in real life.
Yeah, can you share a success story of an individual who has benefited from a talent pathway plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, I want to send you back to the podcast with Becca Gibson again,
Mhm.
because we kind of talk about how we did that in nursing homes for sure. So that gives you a much, longer story. Nicomia also talks about one of those there. But we've seen some great success. Both in accounting roles, somebody coming in straight, APAR, going into payroll, going specifically into like a controller role, and then a CFO role. So really kind of working their way in throughout the organization. And some of the key differentiators and distinctions that we saw with individuals that were able to do some of those things is one, when you go into a controller role, at least in this organization, the controller was not a people manager. It was this process project management position, right? Whereas the CFO was a people management position because it was responsible for all of the people within the finance department. And so, the key there was really understanding the distinctions between that and knowing, finance folks are typically very analytical. So, how do we develop the people skills within this? And do they have a want to over time? The other place that we've seen this incredibly successfully. So, we work with a lot of lawn and garden type of landscaping companies. And within that, we have, and I actually spoke at the Illinois Landscape Association. And so within that, bringing folks in at the ground level, mowing lawns for 2, 3, 4 summers, right?
Mhm.
And then moving into maybe it's on, the softscape side and then the hardscape side. So as they're moving through the organization, they're gaining the project management skills, they're understanding pricing, they're understanding sales, they're understanding, hey, when we're a 2-man crew and I'm responsible for that other person, I'm starting to learn some leadership skills. So those are 2 examples where we've really seen that in very different industries work incredibly well. And again, you can listen to the nursing home example as well.
What role does technology play when you're creating and managing a talent pathway plan?
So depending upon how robust your organization is, it can play a huge role or not a big one at all. Again, I've talked about predictive index. That PI is definitely it's an assessment, it's a piece of technology. And so, using that within, but some of your payroll, HRIS organization or companies will also have pieces in there where they can actually create some of these just based on natural progression of jobs based on org charts as well.
What advice would you give to maybe other HR professionals who are looking to implement similar talent pathway plans?
Yeah, what I would say is make sure you're talking with your leadership team around what are their biggest struggles. Pull your turnover reports. Where are you seeing your turnover reports happen? So, not just based on division and leader, but also based on position. So, are we seeing our highest level of turnover within our entry level roles, which is typically what we see? But where do we see that? And can you start to see any trends? And also, if you're doing exit interviews, you can pull that exit interview data and really get underneath why are people saying that they are leaving? Are they leaving because they're bored or they're not challenged? Those are great indicators that there's a need for this that probably could have retained folks a little bit more. The other piece that I would say is the mindset of yourself and your leadership team. If the mindset is we're going to lose folks anyways, it doesn't matter, this isn't going to work either.
Hmm. Do you make a pretty big effort to ensure that diversity and inclusion is included in talent development and pathway planning?
Yeah. So when we look at diversity and inclusion, I think that there's a couple key pieces here. One key piece of diversity is the more diverse our our employees are, the more we're going to be able to be innovative. We know this, the research has shown this time and time again. And so, one of those key pieces is when we're starting to look at our teams, and of course, we use predictive index for this, is we're looking at our teams and we're saying, what is the strategy that this team is executing? And who is currently on our team? And what don't we have on our team that we really need to bring into this to ensure that we have the diversity of the team in order to move it forward? And when we can start with those conversations and having those conversations to get to know each other as people versus as whatever label we want to put on it, that creates inclusivity right there. And so when we're looking at diversity, again, we're looking at, do we have the right behavioral traits? Do we very specifically have the core values alignment? And then how are we growing folks into this, knowing that, you know, individuals' backgrounds has a huge impact on the way that they're going to see the world and the strategy that we're specifically executing.
How important is mentorship in career advancement and talent pathway plans?
Incredibly. I don't know of anyone that's grown in their career without a mentor or some sort of an example of what's possible for them to do that. And, so as those talent pathway plans are developed, behaviors are really important. One of the key things, one of the key conversations I have with just about every manager or supervisor or lead that wants to be promoted is, who is going to replace you? So if you are saying, hey, I want to move into this next level position, amazing. You then are now going to be supervising the role that you just stepped out of. So if you don't have a you or something similar or better than a you in that role, how are you going to be able to truly be successful in the next level role? So within that, there's a lot of coaching around growing your own replacement, which of course is mentorship and leadership right there.
Can that be a challenge? Like, I'm a talented person. I think I got all kinds of time left or whatever. I'm not going to help anybody. Or have you found that people are usually open to being mentors?
So again, it depends upon how you frame it. I think everything is in the framing. So if it's framed the way that, I just framed it, which is, hey, you want to grow, the only way I'm ever going to promote you is if you have somebody to step into your role. Well, I'm going to make sure I've got that person if that's what I want, right?
Yeah.
So I think framing of it's really important. The other piece of it is, what do we celebrate as an organization? I mentioned Jenna Spencer earlier. I said, what's the biggest win in your organization right now? And she goes, turnover, because her folks are getting what they need out of life, and that's being celebrated. So organizational culture plays a huge impact in that as well.
Yeah, definitely. How do you align talent development initiatives with the company's long-term strategy?
Yeah. So again, it's looking at that long-term strategy, saying, where are we going? 5 years, 10 years, et cetera. And guess what? Can we really see out 10 years at this point in time? I'm going to tell you, no. Technology is changing so much. We've got AI coming on to the circuit. All of those things are happening. But when we look at where we're going, that 3 to 5 year trajectory, what people strategy do we need? Where do we need people in place to do that? That plays a huge role in what that is and how it's developed. And again, I think that question gears more towards succession planning at the highest level of the organization versus the moves through the organization.
Okay, sounds good. Any final thoughts on creating enroll and talent pathway plans?
Again, talk to your people, figure out what is stopping them from being successful where they are at. If you have a turnover issue in a specific area, really figure out why, especially if it's because there's not room to grow into another title. All right, what makes that person tick and what will give them the growth where they're currently at so that they're challenged and engaged in the work that they're doing.
Okay, awesome. Traci, great to talk to you again. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thanks, Chad. Have a great one.
You too. So long, everybody.
Thank you so much for listening today. I'd love to connect with you. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn at Traci, Traci Austin, and at our website at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. If you'd love to learn more about our process, please reach out to us. And again, thank you so much for listening and sharing your feedback with us through a review. Have a fantastic day.